Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and everyone out there, hey, hopefully you're having a wonderful day. This is the last show before we have a little long break where we have a 4-day weekend coming up with obviously Thanksgiving Day coming up tomorrow, and Friday we won't be doing that. We won't be doing that show either. So with that being said, everyone, welcome into the Computer America Show. And hey, why don't we go ahead and get things started with computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything, including today's show notes. It will have past shows, future shows, podcasts, video, all that and more, including articles, reviews, and things like that at computeramerica.com. So I seem a little distracted. That's because if everything goes well, and we're going to do this right now, we should be contacting our guest here in just a moment, and we're going to go ahead and do that. So hopefully just 1 second, everyone. And Scott, can you hear me? All right, perfect. So you're not on yet. I have you all potted up, but I'm going to finish introducing you, and then we'll do good. So everyone, the person that I just got on the line is a regular correspondent here for Computer America. He's the owner, CEO of Berkeley Veritronic Systems. If you haven't heard of them, or even his books, such as Hacked Again, and of course, Cybersecurity is everybody's business. Then you are in for a treat because he's very knowledgeable, and we love to have him on every single month to talk about the latest, hacks, threats, and just newsworthy things that we don't cover in our day-to-day. So this is a great roundup, a great recap, and obviously with the shopping season coming up, all the more relevant. So with that being said, let's go ahead, bring him on, hit the button. And Scott, welcome back onto Computer America. How you been?
Doing great. Great to be back. Thanks for having me on again, Ben.
Yeah, our pleasure. So obviously, thank you for doing this. I know that, and happy Thanksgiving Eve, if that's even a thing. We're about to head into the crazy time of the holidays where, we're going to be on break. And then, of course, right after the long break, we head into CES. So that's going to be fun.
Yes.
Yeah, so with that being said, let's get a little bit of background for those of us who haven't heard of you before. Let's go ahead and just talk about yourself and what it is that you try to do when you come on Computer America. How do you intend to inform us?
Absolutely. I try to focus in on cybersecurity, which again now it affects all of our lives, and I'm hopefully trying to get across the message. A lot of the things that can be done for consumers and small business owners to keep safe from cyber threats are in our power, in our control. It's not always about a big spend of money, but sometimes it's doing some common sense, best practice things that will be preventative and be proactive to give us a secure cyber stance. And hopefully that message will come across in some of the things that we discussed today and in our ongoing interviews here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, with that, you bring a series of topics. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to check out any of these topics in more detail, we'll be linking to all of these articles there on our website at Computer America. We'll have the show notes and, of course, links to our guest website and more. And I think the first one, of course, has to be something that we kind of, ended with last time you were on the show. And that was that you were heading down to Florida, I believe Orlando, if I remember correctly, for FutureCon's cybersecurity conference. And I guess now you're back from Orlando. So how'd that go?
Yeah, it was a great event that I had down there, and it was actually right outside of Fort Lauderdale.
Nice. Okay, my bad.
Beautiful weather, and it was a packed house, which I was really excited about. And it was everywhere from small business owners, cybersecurity vendors there, a lot of people just sharing knowledge, which to me is kind of exciting. And the show wasn't too big and it wasn't too small. So it was that good balance where you got to talk to everyone that came by, and had a wonderful time. I was able to give the keynote there, and the topic was cybersecurity is everybody's business, in line with my book, and did that over lunch. So we had a full packed room, and they pounded me with questions before, during, and after. And a lot of the things that I talked about were certainly the dark web, and what is the dark web, and sharing tips and tricks and information, what's actually down there. And I think that really got some good attention to the audience, and it just resulted in a lot of thought-provoking questions, I think. And it was interesting, the majority of people there, although they've heard of the dark web, were never on the dark web, which I found interesting.
Yeah, and that happens so often because the dark web, I think, has been mentioned enough in Hollywood and in pop culture and media that it has this almost mystique about it, where it's like the dark web, the place where crooks and bandits go. And the number one response that I get from a lot of people is that when they finally get on the dark web, or they decide to actually try it out for once, a lot of them say, "Man, it's actually really boring on here." Because to find any kind of information is, it really is just like almost, I don't want to say an ungoogleable internet, but it's just a giant repository of like either webcams or databases or things that shouldn't be cataloged or categorized by Google. Like the dark web's actually pretty boring. So I hope that you got that vibe to them.
Yeah, and it's well said there, and that's exactly what I kind of shared. There's not a ton of things. We're so comfortable on the surface web where we all operate, which represents a fraction of a percent of the overall internet. We're very comfortable there because we can jump on a Google, we can jump on Bing, we could do a search, we can do things quick, and there's a little bit of lag or latency, I guess I could say, when you're doing things through a VPN and Tor browser to access the dark web. So it's almost like you're stepping back a decade as far as reaction, as far as typing something, hitting enter, or moving your mouse, and now I'm like, oh, what happened? I'm waiting for the spinning wheel of death. This is not that much fun. So I do think you're right. It turns a lot of people off. And we dove into a couple sites and I actually showed them some specifics. And the part that's interesting is, and the more I think about it, I understand why. Poor grammar, poor sentence structure, lousy graphics often. Yeah. And really bad guys don't care because they don't worry about search engine optimization. They're not worried about all those type of things because they're lying under the radar because they're trying to stay anonymous and use Bitcoin for all their transactions against a anonymous. So I think it's a fascinating eye opener to people there in attendance, and when people do learn about the dark web, to see how much stuff that is going on down there actively. The millions of dollars per day are being bought and sold of goods, and most of it is illicit drugs, guns, stolen credit cards, identity theft. That's the realm where hackers really do enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and of course a topic very much worth talking about. I'm poking through the article that we're going to include in the show notes about this. I also see here that you also wrapped up the morning by talking about 5G, Internet of Things, and cyber warfare in the future. All topics that we could probably dedicate entire shows to each one. So it sounds like a lot of good information was shared there.
Yeah, and then in the afternoon, I was asked to be on a panel discussion with a couple other cybersecurity experts, and we focused just on ransomware there, and it really lit the room up as we got deep into discussion. So kind of with that fresh in my mind, I tried to tie in some of today's topics that crisscross into the world of ransomware because it's such a hot topic. It affects so many people, and there's not a lot of information out there, and people are still asking a lot of questions. So I thought it might be a nice kind of area to gravitate towards today.
Sure. And with that, I can't think of a better segue. Let's go ahead and talk about this source that you have here from the Next Web, and it's talking about, of course, man, that's weird. But no, it's hackers demand $14 million in Bitcoin to unlock systems for 110 banks, no, hospitals, no, city government facilities, no, nursing homes, of all things, nursing homes across the U.S. What's up with that?
Yeah, that really caught my eye because I was just sharing stats on cyber breaches, and the main targeted area in my presentation recently was the healthcare sector, where 48% of attacks are toward healthcare, and there's a growing target toward hospitals, doctors, and as an extension, I think we could look at even nursing homes because it's all tied into the same system in a sense. And why? Because, I know, as we've talked about in the past, there's a lot of sensitive personal information there, medical information that's all tied with not just our standard address and phone number, blah, 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 but also social security numbers, certain coding for medical procedures and approvals. And there's a lot of medical fraud out there. So when you put that all into a ball, that sector is getting pounded. Now you add into this an interesting variant of ransomware that's being used throughout different organizations. And these are what, again, I call more target attacks, where they're hoping to get not hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, but really millions of dollars for anything tied to the healthcare, or in this case, nursing homes. So it's kind of newfound ground, I guess, for the hackers to target. And in a lot of cases, they've been pretty successful pulling in millions of dollars. In this particular case, this nursing home facility there, a group of them, VCPI, they at the end, they said they really can't afford to pay the Bitcoin ransom because things are tough and things are tight. So how do they operate? That's the question that comes out when you don't have internet access, billing problems, your phones don't work, you can't email, you can't access client records. And who's going to fight for the poor people that are in this nursing home? It's tough.
Yeah.
Family members? Who? We don't know. So it's a disaster.
Yeah, and of course, in a lot of cases, sometimes these facilities are for people who don't have family to, of course, kind of look out for them, and hey, you were just in Florida, and trust me, having grown up in Florida, there's plenty of facilities. It's a decently regulated industry, but at the same time, I have seen so many nursing homes and nursing home companies, kind of pop up, dissolve, pop up as something else. Like the emphasis on cybersecurity, I can just kind of say that nursing homes, it's going to be like, completely last on their list. Like it's going to be somewhere so far down the list, it's going to end up, really, really just not important. But hey, the internet is needed for a lot of the core facilities, operations. And and of course, I think in the keynotes that you give down at FutureCon, you also mentioned Bitcoin, and Bitcoin, it's kind of left the public eye a little bit. It's I think once everyone purchased Bitcoin at like $20,000, and then they all sold it for like $3,500, everyone kind of got turned off. But Bitcoin is something that's not talked about a lot, but is still very much in play in ransomware. For what reason?
Yeah, and you bring up a brilliant point. And I've been working very closely with multiple insurance companies that specifically provide cybersecurity insurance to their policyholders. And in many of my discussions, the successful companies are going out there and they will stockpile a large number of Bitcoins so they can actually respond on their policyholders' request if they're a victim of ransomware, so they can immediately respond to the hackers.
Interesting.
They can negotiate a settlement. So they actually do not pay the demanded Bitcoins, which I find interesting. So if a hacker comes in and demands, hey, you got to pay us 300,000, US dollars equivalent in Bitcoins, the cyber insurance, that when they kick in there, they'll go in with agents and actually go back and forth and negotiate. And a lot of the negotiations are based upon what variant they believe the ransomware is. So they'll do some quick forensics, looking at the screenshots, the file, whatever they can glean really quickly. And they also look in their repertoire where they actually might have the keys to decrypt it from yet a customer beforehand. So in some cases, they can actually unlock it. If it's a new variant, then they realize, okay, we got to pay, and then they'll go back and forth and negotiate with the hacker, the cyber criminal, and they may settle for 50 cents on a dollar or half the Bitcoins that were asked, in other words. And that's often how they successfully do it. So it's almost like a standard business negotiation if they were buying a product or service. But you're doing this with cyber criminals. The good news is, as a consumer, as a business owner, if you have cybersecurity insurance, you don't have to worry about negotiating with a cyber terrorist. You don't have to worry about, hey, how do I go get Bitcoins? You can now hand this off to your insurance carrier, and they will go in on your behalf and take care of this. And what they're finding is often they will pay the ransom, which is unfortunate because I always try to encourage people, don't pay the ransom. But in a lot of cases, hey, you were talking about here, this particular case with 110 nursing homes, you may not have a choice. You may have this $14 million, maybe it could be negotiated down to 1.2 million or something just to get the hackers off your back and get your keys. That may be well-founded. So if you have cybersecurity insurance, let the experts deal with it. As long as they're trained and they're going to be able to stand behind that insurance, it's comforting as a business owner and a consumer that you could rely upon your insurance company to actually do something for you. And number one, get your files back so you can get back to business, so you can meet payroll and get back on the internet and take care of the patients in this case or those in the nursing home. Lives are a lot more important than anything else.
Yeah, it's and towards the end of the article, it mentions that this was probably preventable for a long time through communications that they received. It's been actually lying kind of dormant for about a year on their systems, and at any point they could have kind of closed this up. So I was going to ask you, how do we prevent something like this for all these businesses, and best practices with email and clicking links and things like that. But it doesn't feel like no matter how much we say, keep your operating system up to date and don't click links in emails. It's all it takes is one slip up and you could be compromised for a year later without anyone even knowing.
Absolutely. And I always ask this when I'm presenting, and I'll even ask a rhetorical question now for your listeners. When is the last time you had a pop-up to upgrade your iOS or particular application, be it on your mobile, your laptop, your desktop, your tablet, that you actually stopped what you're doing and said, okay, I'm going to update it here and now because security is paramount? Unfortunately, and myself included, I've been guilty of this. I've got to run out the door in 5 minutes. I got to run to the bank. I'll do it tomorrow, later, tonight, and we put it off. Even you get the friendly reminders that may pop up. Remind me later, remind me tomorrow, I'll do it next week. And you can click on that so it comes back and reminds you. So we're all kind of complacent. That's the problem. And to your point, if we can just carve out those 5 or 10 minutes to update it, it will improve our security posture greatly. The other aspect I really try to encourage people is to consider security awareness, cybersecurity awareness training. No one likes it. It's not a lot of fun. It doesn't cost that much money, but again, it takes time. You got to trade your time so you can educate your employees, everyone within the organization, so they can clearly identify, hey, this is a suspicious email. This is a phishing attack. I constantly, I had another one yesterday. One of my resellers in South Africa wrote to me and said they got multiple emails that were extremely convincing to wire transfer money to a different account that came from me. It's a slight variation of a phishing attack, but it was really luring them into similar things. But it was really trying to, get them to compromise via wire. And guess what? They said, we just wanted to check before we hit send to send you this large sum of money. And I'm like, stop. So what does it tell you? If people take their time and do a little surveillance about maybe your email, your title, your website, your products, and they use convincing logos and verbiage and acronyms in your industry, they're going to go to your trusted partners. It may not even be your employees. It may be your resellers, your vendors. It may be those that you advertise with. That's who they're going to target because there's that familiarity, and they can, in some way, socially engineer the scam. The same thing is true with ransomware. Most of these attacks, when you trace it all the way back, it's the one innocent person or employee that got a convincing-looking phishing email, and they said, it looks so real. I clicked on it, or I was on the phone. I wasn't thinking. I'm going through a million emails, so I got no time, and click, I made a mistake.
I have phone I tried to fall for that, and I use those words very specifically. I tried to fall for that last month when one of my contacts, it was actually a guest on the program, and like the very next day after he was on the program, his entire email was compromised, and essentially he just sent one line of text with a link and said, "Hey Ben, check this out," or "Hey, check this out." I forget what it was, and it was a zip file. Like it tried to download a zip file to my computer, and of course I'm just like, I just had this guy on. Maybe he wants to show me some product images and things like that. And I tried to click it. Gmail and Chrome were actually the first one to say, "Hey Ben, you're being an idiot. Don't do that." And I thought, no, it's cool. I know this guy. I kept trying to open it, like, please infect my system. And Microsoft stepped in, Chrome stepped in, and eventually I just gave up because the system itself, which is again another good reason to update, because the system was much better than my brain was. And then like 2 hours later, I got an email saying, "Sorry, my email is compromised. Disregard any emails you may have gotten from me." And yeah, I realized then that even someone who talks about this on a monthly, weekly basis here on Computer America, nothing really beats good. Of course, I shouldn't have clicked on the link to begin with, but having that up-to-date system and that prevented it was, a lifesaver. So,
yeah, excellent.
It's pretty crazy. So again, with this one, Wisconsin-based IT company Virtual Care Providers locked 80,000 computers, or at least their system was locked due to a ransomware called Ryuk. And looks like 80,000 computers for any number of clients who happen to work or who happen to live in those facilities in 45 states. And again, just kind of skimming the article, did they pay? Because they mentioned that the
No, they couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford to pay it, they were saying there, because of financial reasons. So they're kind of in a pickle right now, and that's where it gets hard. What they didn't go into is if there is cybersecurity insurance in place, which may be the case, and they may still be negotiating or trying to figure out a way to get this under control. And I neglected to probably point out one of the most obvious things, and maybe it's not that obvious because I didn't say it, but based upon the fact that this, and I think you brought this point up, the intrusion probably happened well over a year ago. So what it tells all of us is it's not always something where you see it pop up and you have to react. We have to be proactive and focus on not just best practices in education, but also regular backups that we disconnect from our network, and preferably keep in mind, a lot of companies say, well, I back up on the cloud. Well, guess what? Many of these cyber criminals realize that people do that these days, so they're infecting not just your computer networks, your local hard drives, but your cloud backup will be infected as well. So now it's a double whammy. So again, I encourage people to consider a full backup that you can disconnect and store off site. So it's not connected to the internet, the network, the cloud, or anything else, because these hackers are getting smarter and smarter, and they realize they're going to get you one way or another. But if you're doing these regular backups, at least you have something you can fall back on. Now, it's a pain. It's going to take if you do backing up a laptop, you got to wipe the thing. It may take you a day to rebuild and reload and so on and so forth. But you have some recourse, as opposed to being stuck in a pickle where these poor guys are.
I think it was the city of Baltimore, when they had their own ransomware problem. They had a system in place. They had a system where they could recover from any disaster, including ransomware, but they never exercised their plan. They never, they never went to see how long it would take or what it would really take to get their system back up from a huge ransomware attack. And they said, all right, we have a backup. It's still going to take about, I think they said 2 or 3 weeks to get the entire city of Baltimore back up and running. So have a plan, but also make sure you can carry it out. That's important too. So, and also I want to mention one more other thing about this before we move on to the next one, which is if you're wondering, well, how lucrative can this be? Because they're hitting targets that don't seem to be able to pay. So how much money can they really be making? In the article, they mentioned that back in January, in 5 months, this variant of malware was able to get $3.7 million. So low effort, low risk, high reward for these guys.
Yeah, and if you look at that, that's almost a year ago. It's 11 months ago. So imagine how much more money they've been accumulating throughout this year, and how much more they will make in the coming months as other victims become, see this into reality. It's scary stuff.
Absolutely. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump to our next topic. And as if ransomware wasn't scary enough, I guess now we're looking at ransomware begins to make a name for itself. Is this another variant? Just like last one was Ryuk, and there was like WannaCry. Is this a new variant?
Yeah. It's yet a different variant, and it kind of, I guess the name, when I first started doing a little research on it, reminded me of maybe like 80s metal bands or something like that. Maybe some of the hackers really enjoy heavy metal. Who knows? But the part that maybe I guess chuckle was when they first launched this, and when this first started to get out there, this new variant of ransomware, DeathRansom. It didn't even encrypt the files, which is kind of ironic. They didn't properly develop the software or properly test it. Like most software, there's, I guess, some bugs in it, and immediately once researchers and cybersecurity experts got in there, they said, we can pen the extension, your files aren't encrypted, hey, you're fine, back to business. And then what the article helps us appreciate is, well, I guess the hackers may realize this ain't working, and November 20th, they updated it. So now the files are truly encrypted, and there's no backdoor easy way to work around it, and so now becomes a much bigger threat.
And it's although part of me thinks that even though they may have kind of misstepped this one, you would think that would be obviously a very good thing for security researchers, because they'd be able to get and I'm sure you know this better than I do, but something called a definition. Like they'd be able to get a trace on this thing and then prevent it from spreading again. But I guess even that's not a foolproof thing.
No, it isn't. A lot of these ransomware attacks, in particular, when they analyze the malware and the certain strains. In fact, I talked about this last week, and it was fascinating to hear some other cybersecurity research that was brought forth in the discussion. But there's thousands of variants of this constantly coming out. So they're taking the base code, and it could be a script kiddie that's putting this stuff together, and somebody else takes it and modifies it. And then what they're purposely doing, say it's a Russian hacker group, they'll take malware that's known origin from, maybe it's a famous Romanian hacker group, and mix some of the code up. So as you do forensics on this later on, post-breach, when the experts come in, they're like, well, where did this come from? It looks like it's Russia, but wait, it also looks like it's Romania. And it gets very confusing, and it's hard to then know the origin of it and determine, hey, is this just a hacker group? Is this well organized? Is this state sponsored? Because they're mixing up so many variants of malware to basically send a curveball to investigators. So it's getting harder and harder to do a proper trace on it and do forensics on it. And what's starting to happen is, in fact, this article references a great site, and that's kind of another parallel topic of ID ransomware, which I think is just a brilliant idea. You can go on there, and they have identified 791 different ransomware so far, and this list keeps growing. It's basically a public use type of thing. It's free. You can submit maybe the particular ransomware note that you got. If you have a encrypted file, if it comes from the origin from a particular email address, any of those pieces of the puzzle you can feed into this and upload to this website, ID Ransomware, and it will help identify what the specific strain of ransomware is. And why is that so important? Well, think about somebody that's doing cyber forensics, and probably tied in closely with some of the stuff that cybersecurity insurance companies do, and anybody in threat intelligence and others. They can use engines like this to quickly identify what strain it is, to see, again, do they have a key to unlock it, unencrypt the files? If it's a new strain, if it's a variant of another one. So it really helps you do a quick dive in and kind of get a handle on the situation. It's kind of like emergency crisis mode for ransomware, so you can respond the appropriate way.
Right. And I was actually just curious because obviously one of the most popular was WannaCry. And I was like, does this one identify it? And I found this fun because it was, again, speaking to the idea that you can change existing code and turn it into a completely different one. You can see here that, they're also not the most ingenious when it comes to names. And you can see they have WannaCache, WannaCry, WannaCry.net, WannaCry Fake, WannaCry OnClick, WannaDie, WannaPeace, WannaSmile, WannaSpam. All of those are, of course, I'm sure, in some ways, even if they aren't, they are probably variants on WannaCry. If not, then they just stole the name. But still, it just shows that one successful, kind of virus can spawn a dozen more in its place after it's been caught.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, and there are ones out there in the wild that have not even been discovered yet.
Or named, yeah.
Were named, and again, if you look at this exhaustive list, if you scroll down the different types they've detected so far, a lot of these, the same core is there, and it's built upon and evolves as they improve it and debug it and add different codes, different types of things to fool their victims.
I gotcha. And by the way, so there's the article, obviously. We'll have a link to the ID ransomware and this article in particular with the new DeathRansom. But I did want to throw you a little bit because I have a topic that we covered. Let's see. I think this was back in, I pulled it from the Computer Technology News, November 12th, if you can remember that far back. I know it seems like forever ago, but I'm actually curious, Scott, if you heard about this, because I'm sure in your line of in your line of work, and you have heard of penetration testing, where a company will go in and ask individuals to essentially act like the bad guys and see where their flaws would be. So this article from November 12th, I said back then I wanted to bring it up when Scott Schober was back on the show, so here I am. This happened between a company, a cybersecurity firm, Coalfire, who were going to do a penetration test, and they were doing it for the city of Dallas, the Dallas courthouse. And what happened was the Dallas courthouse, they tried to go there physically and, kind of after hours, see what was up, see if they could get in there and access anything by hand, which is, not the fabulous, kind of movie scene with people jamming on keyboards. But no, they just see, they just wanted to see if they could go walk in. They found a back door in, I don't, again, not like hacking, but they found a door in the back of the building that was open. It was left open when the security guard was doing his rounds, and they closed it, and then they opened it again to prove that it wasn't locked. Unfortunately, when they closed it and then reopened it, because it was a back door and an emergency exit, an alarm went off. And I guess
alarm went off,
yeah. And of course, through their paperwork, I guess they are told to, if you set off any alarms, wait there. Here's your contract. Talk to the police. Don't panic. And essentially, the police arrested them. They stayed in jail overnight. They posted a bail of about $100,000, and now the cybersecurity penetration testers are now going to be facing trial for criminal trespassing. And I wanted your reaction to that whole story, because it seemed, man, if there's a way to lose confidence in an industry, this seems like it.
Yeah, and usually, and I know numerous pen testers out there, and I've asked them sometimes, how do they handle situations like this? Typically, they're working very closely with the owner of a business, if it's a smaller business, larger organizations, the chief information security officer. So they kind of spell out in their contract what they will do or may do, so at least there's minimal repercussions if something crazy like this happens. But there are always unexpected things that may fool you. In this case, I think it went a little bit beyond what anyone would ever expect. And the fact that they actually have to face charges and go to jail is pretty scary. But keep in mind, pen tests are often done, not just your typical mom and pop shop. They're often businesses that have intellectual property, or it could be a lot of money, a lot of personal information.
And by the way, I need to correct myself. I said Dallas courthouse. It was and it probably was a Dallas courthouse, but it was actually in Iowa.
Iowa,
and it was and of course, when you think about the courthouse, there's so many confidential documents that no one should lose. Yeah, a lot of information that, if it's compromised and gets in the wrong hands, that would not be good. And I think it was Dallas County, Iowa, if I remember right, or something like that. The courthouse. That's probably where the Dallas came into play. But regardless, I mean, pen testing, part of the success of it is to keep quiet and keep off the radar, so they could hopefully infiltrate computer networks to find the vulnerabilities and weaknesses, identify it, and then strengthen it. So that way it's preventative. So you don't end up being a victim of ransomware or having your personal information compromised within the courthouse, so on and so forth. So you applaud somebody for taking the initiative to try to stress and find where the weaknesses are. Perhaps a little more upfront conversation to prevent these things from happening, and say, hey, here's what we will be doing if this happens. How do we handle it, so on and so forth, might go a long way going forward. I'm sure these guys are going to be very careful with any future pen tests, especially to make sure that they've got their back covered by the company that's contracting them. Because you never want the company to go after you, or law enforcement either, and saying, hey, you're kind of you're an ethical hacker, but you're stepping over that line a little bit by doing some of these things. It's got to protect them. Yeah, and it just struck me as such a weird thing, because it seemed like cybersecurity, and this is a common practice when it comes to cybersecurity, just isn't taken seriously by the law enforcement, because they had a signed contract with the state of Iowa, and law enforcement, instead of dropping the charges and saying, "Oh, sorry for the confusion," they said, all right, well, instead of felony, you're now going to be charged with criminal trespassing instead of felony trespassing. Clearly, whoever they were in contact with to set this whole thing up, they were not either kind of connected or in touch with law enforcement like they should have been. But I just found that so weird. That was a weird story.
Yeah, it is very peculiar, and I do think that this is the first time I've ever heard about anybody that where it went to the next level. I mean, you realize at some point, law enforcement may get involved, but to hear that there's actually charges and take it to the next level and go to jail, no, I've never heard of that. And it probably sends out a huge flag to pen testers. And typically, most of the pen testers that I know and talk to, They're low key. They don't advertise. It's a word of mouth business.
Mm-hmm.
It probably sends ripples through that community because you got to kind of stay off the radar if you want to be effective in exposing those vulnerabilities and doing your job really good. So it's got to be a tough pill to swallow for them.
Yeah, and I bet you probably wouldn't be a trustworthy pen tester, even if it shows like a badge of honor. If you have a criminal record, even if it's like criminal trespassing, you don't want that. You don't want that in any industry. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so with that being said, like you said, today is going to be kind of about ransomware and things like that. This next one is also about ransomware, ID ransomware, where you upload a ransom note and or sample. I'm sorry, that's actually related to what we just talked about with the DeathRansom. So you included that as a separate link as well. So
yeah,
I didn't see that. My bad. Okay, so after that, New Jersey School District payroll still down after ransomware attack. If there's one industry in the country that has its own money problems without anyone sticking their nose in it, it's the school systems. They are so strapped for cash, and teachers just don't make that much money. To get in the middle of that just seems like easy pickings. So talk about this. Talk about New Jersey.
Yeah, and this one, I guess it especially touched a chord with myself because my sister is a school teacher. Her husband is also a school teacher. They actually live in Livingston, where this attack actually happened. They don't teach in that school, but my sister has triplet boys that just graduated from Livingston High School last year. So we were up there for the graduation and everything else. And then to see the picture of the school on the news right in front of me and hear all about this, so I instantly reached out to her and texted her. And it was, in fact, I guess the buzz up there that it was all the schools within that district, which I think affected 9 schools. So it was pretty widespread, and the extent, it was more than just, hey, we lock up things. It affected their payroll system. They had problems with email, with their phone system was sporadic, and they couldn't get that back on, couldn't get on the internet. So they actually had to, which I'm sure students loved on a Monday morning this week, to have a delayed opening so they could kind of get things back into shape and open the school up, just to make sure it was safe and they could just do basic functioning and get the staff in there. But it causes such a disruption when somebody suffers an attack like this. And again, they didn't really share, and I haven't seen an update on this yet, or if they will immediately. Did they pay a ransom? What are the next steps? So it's still a breaking story where I haven't heard all the details unfold yet, and hopefully they'll share some more things as this becomes more public information.
Yeah, and some of the comments on the story, and I'm not going to believe all of them, kind of at face value, but a lot of them do mention that this happens more often than than I think schools are willing to admit, because, like you said, this idea of ransomware insurance is becoming more and more popular, and I kind of feel like it. If a company, think of like Uber, a company as large as Uber, and they had the data, and they had the data leak, they were compromised, and a company as large and as regulated as Uber tried to sweep their cyber incident under the rug. I can imagine schools and school districts who, of course, would just have swarms of parents and concerned citizens. They would also want this taken care of very quietly and very quickly. So this probably happens more than we know.
I do think it does happen often. And again, I don't want to mention any names because there's a lot of names I'm finding as I visit companies and provide education and speak that share with me off the record, we suffered a ransomware attack too. And I was like, really? I didn't hear about that. And they're like, oh, well, we didn't want to go public on it. And I'm thinking like, well, now you start thinking about the laws, the federal laws that are out there that require you to have breach disclosures and let people know if their information's compromised, so on and so forth. So a lot of people, to your point, cover it up and don't really share the truth, which could come back and bite them. And I think the recent stat that I heard was of small businesses, about 25% of them throughout the United States now go out of business when they get hit by a large ransomware attack and can't respond. So it can actually put the closed for business sign on your door because you can't respond, because you didn't back up your data, because you didn't sit down, like you said before, have a plan or contingency plan. What if this happens? How do we respond? That's certainly something business owners need to seriously think about and spend some time. If they can't get the answers, they should probably bring some people in that can answer those questions. They should consider the cybersecurity aspect of it to, again, really it doesn't solve the problem, but it mitigates some of the risks or balances out some of those risks. And that's really what I look at insurance for anything, be it car insurance or anything else. So if you have the inevitable, you don't get hit with the whole nut, because that's when it could be catastrophic.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I'm actually surprised that stat is 25%. 1 in 4 sounds like a big number. I'm surprised it's so low, because especially when they define it as organizations that are hit with a large with a large ransomware attack. I would think that if that happened to every company across the U.S., then I think that number would be higher than 25%. That's just pretty fortunate. So
it's kind of shocking.
Yeah, very, very shocking. And it also goes along with, I'm sure a lot of research that you did with your book. Obviously cybersecurity is everybody's business. I'm sure that you talked to a lot of business owners that, kind of felt that they know it's a problem. They know it's a risk. They know that they should back up. But, even large companies that should have the resources to do this can't be bothered. So companies just kind of hope, I hope not me today.
Yes.
So there you go. And so real quick, just going through some of your other topics here. And I know that we mentioned this last time, but it was a lot of fun to talk about, and I wanted to mention it again. But you also, along with the, kind of like co-promotion or promotion with your, with your recent book, there's also Cybersecurity is Everybody's Business, the official music video. That started playing right away. So yeah, we'll include a link to this, but just want to mention one more time, how's the reception been to that? You guys are getting a lot of a lot of good views on that.
Yeah, and I think that was the part that I stood back and got a good chuckle out of. And this is really, I give credit to my brother and partner in the business, Craig Schober. He's kind of the brains of the operation, along with his wife Kelly, and they came up with the concept and kind of did a little karaoke parody on it, and partly to do it for fun, to see, hey, maybe we'll get a little bit of buzz. And we're pleasantly surprised. We got so many views on it, and more importantly, so many comments. When I go into a room to present or anything with a book signing or different things, I've had people come up to me and they're like, man, you guys are fun. You got that crazy video. I watched it the other day. Awesome, man. So it gives you a chuckle. It makes you feel good, at least. And part of it is the hope that, again, we're spreading the message that cybersecurity is not something for the IT department or chief information security officer. It really is now becoming everybody's business, and you could solve a lot of these problems like a puzzle. We try to relate it to whether you're a consumer, whether you're a business owner, and hopefully that resonates when they watch the crazy video, or hopefully more importantly, that they're reading the book and getting something out of it where they could take some actionable items. And it just makes you feel good just having different means to get the word and the buzz and spread it out there.
Absolutely. And actually, just real quick, I was just poking through my news feed, and this popped up. You'd definitely be interested in this as well, because it fits our, it fits our conversation for today. This one coming to us from Ars Technica and Hacker's Paradise, Louisiana's ransomware disaster far from over. I vaguely remember Louisiana is going through a rather large ransomware attack, because they said that lost files and issues with backup management keep affecting Medicaid and other services. And it looks like that the long-lasting effects I guess we're still finding out about these because, this is like, it seems like a known entity. We're saying that local governments and municipalities and strange services are getting hit with ransomware. But this was Louisiana back on November 18th, I guess, since they announced it. And they are still barely reopening offices just like 2 days ago.
Yeah, I think to your point, it's so widespread, the results of what happens as it unfolds. You don't realize today, just because you're victimized with ransomware, that it will have such a long effect. And like the other point we talked about earlier, sometimes that malware was launched 6 months, a year ahead of time, when maybe an employee or somebody innocently clicked on that phishing attack or clicked on an ad that they shouldn't have, and now it's downloaded, and it may sit dormant for a while before the hackers say, boom, let's take it to the next step and try to collect. That's all the unknowns make it so insidious, I think, and it tells all of us that we have to assume, and this is what I spoke about last week at FutureCon down in Fort Lauderdale, assume you will be the victim. It's just a matter of when. And then it helps people to think, wow, so you think I will be? I'm going to say, yes, you will be. But if you take these precautions, you'll be able to at least react, survive, and hopefully thrive in your business. If you do nothing and do a wait and see, you may just be a statistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of wrap up the Louisiana thing, they a little bit better. They said that only 10% of the state's 5,000 servers were affected, and about 1,500 computers were of the state's 30,000 computers were damaged by the ransomware, whatever damage means by ransomware. And they also said that some of the files that they were supposed to, kind of keep up to date and, Request for Information Act, it's Freedom of Information Act for request. They said that they couldn't actually fill a number of those because the data was lost because backups were not current. I know that there's easy pickings on Louisiana as a state for so many things, but we're not going to mention those. I'm going to say, in this regard at least, Louisiana is very typical of many states.
Yeah, they're probably representative for the majority of states. And I think with something like this in the article, if I remember the story correct, they had to disconnect all computers on the network just for safety as well. And that's often another thing that is done. We talked about that last week, even down at FutureCon, and some people thought, well, just yank the cord out. Yes and no. It's not always that easy just to yank the cord out of a computer or a network. Probably the most important thing to try to do is disconnect from the internet immediately. Sometimes if you yank the cord out, now what's going to happen is you have cyber forensics experts come in, and the first thing they're going to have to do is boot your computer up, which may cause it to spread even further or do other unknown things. So it's not always the best thing just to yank a cord out and walk away and say, well, let them figure it out. But if you had to do anything first, I'd at least recommend disconnect from the internet if you can, because it's going to be communicating that way. It's going to be trying to spread throughout other computers on the network. And call in an expert and don't wait. Most of the forensics experts that I've talked to said that being alerted early, if they get a phone call immediately and they could dispatch somebody, an expert, to be there within X number of hours or that day, they can often prevent the spread of ransomware, minimize the number of files that are actually encrypted, actually kind of stop it in its tracks. So they'll give you specifics. And again, that's where the cybersecurity insurance comes into play. Mm-hmm. You will have a 1-800 number to call 24/7, and then somebody there at the other end that will answer if they're a good provider, answer the phone and give you specific instructions what to do, as opposed to kind of throwing your hands up and staring at your screen trying to figure it out or go do your own research. It's not going to be something easy to do yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with just like we have like a handful of minutes, like 5 minutes left on the show, I wanted to talk about something that is going to be very, very relevant here in the next couple of days, and that is shopping online. I'm wondering if you have any, anything that you'd like to talk about when it comes to, buying things. Maybe people might be directed to vendors that they don't typically shop at. When they're looking for the best deal, they may, ads may pop up and say, hey, you can get this item for just so cheap. People are going to be throwing around. People are going to be throwing around their payment information, their shipping address. They're going to be, just really spreading that information to any number of vendors out there. I wonder if you have any kind of tips you'd like to share with the audience as we head into the shopping season.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple standouts that I always tried to share. Number one, it's probably the most basic, and everyone goes, duh, but shop on trusted sites. We know no sites are 100% safe. Everybody's potentially a victim, but if you look at statistics, you are always better off shopping on well-known shopping sites. I've never had a compromise as a result of shopping on Amazon, for example. So if it's a super cheap price and you're just shopping price only and you're clicking on links and jumping around without paying attention to what you're clicking on and doing research on, and the price seems too good to be true, it probably is a scam. Another very important thing, having a dedicated credit card that you only use for online shopping. It could, again, it maybe is not that convenient, but I think of it like a burner phone, a burner email account. Like people will usually say, I'll get a Gmail account for doing this or that. Kind of makes sense. Don't use a debit card, but use a credit card. Better liability, better protection. You're only held liable if it's compromised for up to $50. If you go back to the issuing bank and say, hey, could you waive the fee? 9 out of 10 times the bank will say, yeah, we'll cover you for the $50 because they want to keep your business.
Right.
So just using common sense there. That way, if you have one card that's only used for online purchases, easy to track, easy to shut off if there's a problem. You can also set up alerts with it. Anything above $100, please alert me immediately so I can approve it. And a lot of these banks now will issue a credit card, Visa, MasterCard, whoever, and they'll text you and say, hey, did you just buy a $2,000 pair of shoes, Ben? And click here, yes to accept, or here to deny. And you're like, wait a minute, I'm not in Vegas. I didn't buy that. No, you could stop it right away. So there's some basic things you could set up now, working with your banks and the credit card companies, and those are kind of like a multi-factor authentication. Before it allows the transaction to go through, it's one more step, one more layer of security to keep it safe. You talked about before operating systems. Before you go online shopping, take a minute to upgrade your operating system, your computer software for different applications that you use, your browser. Take 10, 20 minutes to do that. Obviously, we talked about passwords till we're blue in the face, but as you're setting up new accounts that you're going to log in, everybody wants you to set up an account, log in with password. Don't try to take a shortcut and just do it quick. If you're not good at disciplining yourself and doing a long, strong password, use a password manager. That will go a long way. Use multi-factor authentication. Again, balancing security versus convenience. It's worth taking the time, I think, to do these type of things, and it'll minimize your chance of getting, fooled on the Cyber Mondays and the online shopping and everything else. And if you're on the go and doing it from your mobile device, I should point out, be careful about the free Wi-Fi hotspots when you're shopping online. Hackers know that you're going to be in the mall and you want to get on that free Wi-Fi hotspot. That's when they're going to try to target you. So don't do that. Most phones now, you can host your own hotspot if you're sharing with family members that want to do something and look up a price, or just let it eat into your cellular data. It's worth spending a little bit of money instead of taking time. And then try other means too. As you're doing physical shopping, think about digital wallets, Google Wallet, Apple Pay. Start using that more in your purchasing habits, and that will help go a long way to keep things secure.
All great hints. And by the way, we have some recent reviews. I believe we have a review, kind of to that. It was a it was essentially the Allet, and it's ALLETT. Essentially, they make RFID blocking wallets. So you know, and I, as much as we talk about things like card skimmers, essentially someone coming up behind you and scanning your back pocket, it happens sometimes too. So, you know, little things like that. Scott, there's more articles I wanted to bring up. There was, of course, the one that you submitted with 1.2 billion records found exposed on a single server, which seems like that would be a cram server. There's another one here about a cheap kid smartwatch exposes the location of 5,000 children. And really, I would tie that one into your recommendation of buying from trusted websites. Also, even on websites like eBay or Amazon or the like, there's going to be a lot of knockoffs. So be sure to shop from trusted companies as well, because hey, you know, you're trusting them. So Scott, with that being said, if people want to find out more about you, what you're up to, you're a busy guy. I see your videos. Where can they go?
Well, they can certainly go to my website. It's scottschober.com, and got a ton of information up there. There's some tips you can download for free and lots of blogs I put out there. Twitter is @ScottBVS or Hacked Again Book. They can go to also if they want to learn more about the book there. And if you have any questions, feel free. There's a link on there to email me from my website. I'm happy to answer what I can anytime. So don't hesitate to tweet me or shoot me a quick email, and hopefully I can help find ways to keep you safe.
Perfect. And Scott, we're going to have to work on our schedule here for the month of December, because obviously, you know, the holidays and things like that, but we will certainly get you on as soon as we can. And with that, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Awesome. Happy Thanksgiving. We'll see you next time.
Great. Hey, thanks again. Stay safe and have a great holiday weekend. Take care.
All right, you too. Bye-bye. All right, there. And
Bye-bye.
everyone, there he goes. If